And we are live here at the Mattriarchy. I am, of course, Matt Reese, coming at you from the Great High Plains, the Great American Desert, as it was known about 100 years ago. Coming to us live from far east and much less dry and stark is, of course, Matt McGibson.
I'm eating popcorn now.
Oh, great! You didn't do that when you were off air.
I don't know. I popped the bag and I was like, oh crap, we're going to be streaming.
Yeah. You must have popped the bag while we were waiting for this feed to go live. So that's
pretty
great.
much. It's pretty good though.
So
again, to make obnoxious click sounds with my mouth.
Yeah. Too. I'll just mute you from here.
No.
There we go. And also joining us for the first hour and maybe longer is Carltoons.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on again, man. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
So I'm just gonna jump right on in. Well, actually, I'm sorry. I just saw that in the group chat for those of us who are here, that McJerkface says that he has been betrayed, which is probably close to true. But I can't cotton to popcorn eating on the stream. We just can't do that. We have a high bar for professionalism on here.
Yeah.
We're all amateurs, so we have a very high bar for professionalism.
Popcorn eating is strictly forbidden. Same with Doritos.
Can I talk again?
Yeah.
This is I've never felt more the need to stand up to being censored. You know, the man has a right to his popcorn. Yeah, you guys are walking all over it.
No, you see, I'm not denying you your right to your popcorn. I'm simply using my freedom of association on my stream to say, well, it's our stream, but it's on my channel.
It's always yours, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's ours now, comrade.
If I take a bite of popcorn, I'll mute myself.
There we go. That's the spirit. I like to see that.
Self-censorship. That's what we need for that.
Matt, how's your week been?
It's been pretty good. I found out there was a Little Shop of Horrors cartoon. That was weird, like a kid's cartoon in the 90s where they were all children.
I was unaware of this.
I shared it the other day on Twitter, kind of in disbelief, and apparently everyone else didn't know about this either because all the comments were full of, this was a thing? And
what?
It got cheesy rapping, and it was weird. The 90s were weird.
They were weird. See, the strangest thing that happened in the 90s, and I'm just going to tell you straight on, this is the weirdest thing that happened in the 90s, is that suddenly, like after being pretty much a fringe market in the 70s and 80s, like hip hop and rap became a big deal, right? And there are a couple of reasons for that. I don't want to get onto it now, but the people in suits with slicked back hair noticed that rap was a thing and that it was generating a lot of money from the suburban white kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they pushed it hard. And because rap is simple, everybody thinks that it's easy, right? And so a lot of people wanted to appeal to the youth, in air quotes. And so everything was like hip-hopified, even stuff that shouldn't have been.
Like Little Shop of Horrors.
Well, yeah, like so much.
Or Yogi Bear.
Oh, geez. You remember like how everything in the 90s also they had that trend of like kid versions of old cartoon characters like Tom and Jerry kids, Pup Named Scooby-Doo.
The Muppet Baby.
Because there was Baby Looney Tunes.
That was the early 2000s.
That was the early 2000s, though. But see, that's kind of the weird thing is like it's only kids. Like the 80s had Muppet Babies, and then the 2000s had Baby Looney Tunes.
Well, and see, part of that is that before there was Baby Looney Tunes, there was the Tiny Toons, right?
Yeah, so that's also, and then that's a separate thing on its own.
But it was in many ways the Tiny Toons was more of a spin-off than it was a takeoff of it. It wasn't the Looney Tunes as little kids. It was the next generation of Looney Tunes. So it had kind of a different thing to it.
You know what I'm actually thinking about right now is that, Carl, they've kind of gone back to that because now there's Total Drama Island babies, essentially. There's like a toddler, they're all in daycare.
Oh, yeah, I heard of that.
I wasn't even a big fan of Total Drama Island as a kid.
I've never even heard of Total Drama Island.
Imagine the show Survivor, but animated by Canadians and making a stereotype that Canadians don't make very good cartoons.
Okay.
I'm just joking. About Total Drama Island children is that it just seems like a terrible concept to me because the entire point of Total Drama Island's humor is that it's incredibly sadistic.
It was. I actually have heard, because I know a lot of people, who watched that when they were younger. They're all my age now, being, it was 10 years ago. They loved that show, and I don't know. I didn't like it as a kid. I thought it was too much.
So was it on like Adult Swim or something?
No, it was on Cartoon Network. And apparently what I didn't know as a kid is it was censored. Like there were bits and pieces that were much more gruesome or sexual in Canada, but it was deemed too inappropriate when they brought it over to the US.
Well, that makes sense. They, from what I hear, especially Montreal is kind of a sex town. So
holding back on a really immature joke, just go, that's my kind of place.
Yeah. Apparently, it's pretty easy to locate porn there in Montreal. But
just a second, I'm going to pull up the chat.
Well, they have it showing on TV like after 8 in Canada.
Well, there you go.
It's truly a weird place.
No, I was listening to somebody who was originally from Montreal was talking. They have it just on the newsstand, like in magazine form, right next to your coloring books and your comics, and there's the porn right there. It was like, my God.
That sounds even worse than Japan.
Well, I don't know about
Japan,
that.
They put Canada. They put the porn in front of the kids. Japan, they put the kids in the porn. I'm talking about the. I don't know if you know about this, Reese, but that's actually kind of a trend in different hentai that feature like or I don't know if like they always go say, oh, she's actually like an 1,000-year-old ethereal being who's in the body of a 12-year-old girl, and they come up with the creepy excuses like that, but they're. They like to lewd and sometimes even put these girls in very dirty situations, and they're supposed to be like younger than 14.
Yeah, it's very unnerving. Japan is
definitely shows like a gap in culture. I'm just gonna mute myself while I have some popcorn.
There we go. There we go.
Yes, Matt. Please be quiet while you eat your popcorn.
While we're driving,
as we've already discussed, that's bad radio for like the 4 people or whoever who's tuned in. I don't even know. I can't see that from this screen. They changed the Hangouts layout. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but it used to say how many people were watching the stream. It wouldn't say who they were, but it'd say how many there were at the bottom of the screen, and it doesn't say that anymore. And,
right now, I think it's just Danielle, and she's in the comment saying that's disgusting. I can't tell if that's about my comment about lollies or if that's about me eating popcorn.
Or both.
I could believe both. It's appropriate for both.
Yeah.
He's talking about Yo Yogi. Because we're talking about the kids. She also says that if we think about it, Max Goof and the Goofy movie, which I think are very, very well done, were created because of the trend of let's turn them into kids. And actually, I don't know. You've seen Goofy movie, I'm guessing, right, Reese?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know. That's a great movie about fatherhood.
Well, and I think that actually had more to do with the success of DuckTales, honestly.
Oh yeah, DuckTales. I'm kind of curious, Carl. Do you know the history of this? Were Huey, Dewey, and Louie invented for DuckTales, or was that?
Absolutely not. They existed in cartoon shorts way back.
Well,
yeah, that's what I was curious about.
Yeah, they were created for the cartoons for the shorts, but they weren't really separated as anything until Carl Barks got a hold of them in the comics.
Mm-hmm.
And
I thought you just meant
the whole world the Duckburg and the Junior Woodchuck Scouts and Duckworth, the butler, and the Beagle Boys. A whole bunches of the show that became DuckTales was lifted almost directly out of Carl Barks' Uncle Scrooge Adventures.
Which is funny.
That's actually pretty cool.
It's when you think about it, that technically makes DuckTales a comic adaptation.
Yeah.
DuckTales is my favorite comic adaptation. You know, I'm only, you guys know me, I'm a real comic fan. I'm only, but all the normies think that DuckTales is where it started, and I learned that these characters came from before then, just a second ago. So I'm the most qualified expert on DuckTales.
My goodness, you sound like somebody in a Twitter debate. Knock it off.
I read the Wikipedia article.
I read the Wikipedia article. I'm basically a fan.
So here's how I found out about all of that, right? So when I was a kid and they released DuckTales the first time, right, when I was a child, that's how old I am. So I had gone and I was living in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we were able to see at the show in the town I was in, they had a broadcast channel where I watched DuckTales over the air, right? Afternoon, 4:00 on the CBS affiliate or whatever it was, right? And then I moved up here to Nebraska, and it was no longer available over the air, right? It was an exclusive, and you could only see it in this town because of the way their contracts worked on the Disney Channel, and I didn't have cable at the time. We just had our 3 channels or whatever, so I didn't see DuckTales anymore, right? And I was real bummed about it because I loved that show because I was a child. I mean, it's a good show, but it's especially good if you're a kid. Anyway, I went. I was at my local grocery store, and I saw DuckTales comics on the shelf and Uncle Scrooge Adventures on the shelf, and so I was like, those were the first comics that I bought, And so I read them and I loved them and thumbed through them, the whole works. And I noticed on the Uncle Scrooge Adventures, it actually mentions that there were reprints of comics done in the early 50s, right? And so I was like, oh, that's why. And so like the color coding Huey, Dewey, and Louie wasn't done until the show was released, like consistently. But the characters have existed for 70 years or whatever it is at this point.
That's weird to think about, that they're almost as old as, relatively, they're almost as old as Donald Duck himself.
Mm-hmm.
That's so weird.
That is kind of weird to think about.
It's like those situations. You guys ever know people where they're like 10 years old, but they're already an uncle because their older sibling had a child?
Yeah.
As a kid, that bothered me because it's uncles and aunts, they're supposed to be adults. You can't be a kid, just like you can't be a kid mom. It was breaking rules that my little child brain couldn't handle.
Yeah. I actually have a cousin who is just a year and a half older than my youngest aunt on my dad's side, because my dad's family is very spread out. There were 7 kids born over like 20 years of time, right? So yeah, it's quite a spread. So their oldest, so my oldest cousin on my dad's side is just like a year and a half younger than my youngest aunt. Okay. So they grew up together, right? But when I was growing up, I was always mandated to call my cousin Deb, so I wouldn't get confused and think she was an aunt because she was already an adult.
I'm just gonna tweet out the link again, try to get some extra people in here.
Cool, man. Cool.
Let's see. All right, join us. We are live, join or die, because we found in a recent survey that we're not going to show you that people were 50% more likely not to die, or 99% more likely not to die after watching this stream. Especially
if you're watching it in your home, not driving down the road.
Yeah, see, so we're safety people.
Yeah, that's me.
That's what the whole thing's all about. It's really it's this entire thing is the disappointing build up to a advertisement about driving while distracted.
Yeah. So, excuse me. I have to see. I feel like it's a little my fault. I meant yesterday to tweet out our lineup today once I got everything confirmed, and I didn't do it. So there wasn't the window of time for people to sit back and say, I don't have anything out better to do on a Thursday. But anyway, we do been watching the stuff. We have people that come back and watch later too, and so that's cool. Also, we're butting right up against Niobe's stream. I don't know if you're familiar with him on Twitter or not.
I don't know if I am.
Yeah, he does. He's a Canadian himself, but he's the writer for a comic about a pop star turned action hero, and that is the Niobe character. And but he's streaming right now, and he's got a pretty big pull. So some of the folks that might tune in here, they're already listening over there.
Oh, that's good. Let's see. Bring this up. Read about it. Now I just wait to bring in the people.
While we are waiting, no reason to not hold stuff up too much. I did want to go ahead and mention that Barry and I talked about this last week when we went out last weekend to watch Alita Battle Angel.
How was it?
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. It is so good.
Did you hear the thing about there's some people, and I don't know if this is like conspiracy theory territory, but some were saying that Alita is getting taken out of theaters on March 7th because Disney is trying to get theaters to get rid of any competition for Captain Marvel.
Well, that does sound like a crazy conspiracy theory. However, given the whole Rotten Tomatoes circumstance, I wouldn't hold my breath if it happened.
I'm kind of surprised that I don't know. Like, I do think Disney is calling and saying, "Hey, take that off the website right now."
It's pretty crazy. I don't understand how that even. I mean, like, why that would be a thing.
I'm kind of surprised that with like how Hollywood is and everything, it took Hollywood personalities this long to kill interest for a Marvel movie. You figured that like I don't know, just like Chris Evans or something, like, you know, he's a Hollywood type, not as bad as Brie Larson, but, you know, like you kind of figured that maybe he would have said something before then that could have killed hype. But then again, it's hard to kill the hype machine that is the main MCU.
Well, I think a lot of that with Chris Evans has to do with, like, Chris Evans is a crazy person, right? I mean, he's super emotional. He jumps to conclusions. He's like, you know, not patient with his thought process. I guess that's sort of the same thing, but
I like to think he's a different dude on Twitter than he is on. Well, I mean, that's for everybody, but
right, yeah, I think there's something to be for that. But the thing is the you can tell by the nature of his like vitriol that it's not that he's just trying to be awful. I mean, I think he honestly believes in, you know, a level of equality, in an American ideal, in the idea that we should be the best country in the world. I think there's a patriotism that drives him. I think that he's just so out of touch with what makes that patriotism work that he's a crazy person, right?
I wouldn't even say, like, because there's some stuff I see from him where it's like definitely, because he, like, you know, he's just like, oh, this the Make America Great Again hat is comparable to the swastika, which,
yeah,
to me, I always feel like if you're at this point and you've just compared something to the Nazis, you need to take a step back and really think long and hard about if it was actually worth it, because if you're not joking, it makes you look like a person who's way too emotional.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that's it. I think that he doesn't have the emotional distance to weigh his thoughts.
The internet has ruined the word thought for me.
I'm sorry, I started typing a message and I got distracted myself. So
I was just thinking, I think Carl would get this a little more than you would, but I said that the internet has ruined the word thought for me.
Thought?
T-H-O-T, or the T-H-O-T version.
No, I'm familiar with that one.
There are some things where, like, you know, when you don't want your kids to hear things, or you don't want your little siblings to hear things because they're not ready for it yet. I feel like there's an inverse of that. Like, there are things that I don't want. Like, I know that you'd be aware about because you're on Twitter. But, like, my dad, I don't want him to find out about, like, some trends and stuff like that. And it's the same feeling as when you don't want little kids to find out about things. It's like, no, you were so innocent. Dad, no.
Dad, no, you were
It
so
reminds me of the Chinese news report about, oh, look at these funny foreigners wearing animal costumes. Escape from the cold.
And then it's just like, nobody tell them. Nobody, just let them stay innocent.
You escape from the cold?
Yeah,
it was
they thought people dressed in fursuits were doing it to stay warm.
Because there are places in America that are cold enough for that, but
I wonder, actually, those costumes have to be like really hot and uncomfortable.
Well, they do actually, and like some people that do of course, some people that do the fursuits, that they're really into it, like as a lifestyle. They fully believe they embody the spiritual capacities of these animals or whatever. But some people just think the costuming is cool because you can be a Pokemon and it look really like a Pokemon, I guess. But there was this dude at a con I was at who had this crazy dragon fursuit that was it had fans built into it, like super quiet servo fans, so he wouldn't like overheat in it. And it was like with the full extensions. I mean, the thing had like a 12-foot wingspan. It was ridiculously huge. That
actually sounds pretty awesome. Did it have like the same fur, like kind of derpy furry face, or was it?
No. I mean, it was instead of having the furry face, I mean, it was like a dragon. So it wasn't. Yeah, it was.
That actually sounds pretty awesome.
That does sound cool.
I mean,
like it was. I'm trying to remember the name of the property because this is in a realm of stuff I'm not really super familiar with. Like I think it's Beyblade was the game that had with the dragons and stuff.
Oh, I think the spinning top one, Beyblade.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it was more like that than like your silly animal thing.
Well, that's pretty neat.
And I know that's probably, calling it a silly animal thing is probably insensitive to folks.
All our furry viewers.
That might be furries, but the problem is well, I think, and I'm just gonna come out and say it. One of the things I see as a problem with a lot of that culture is that it's escapism to the point of delusion.
I'm gonna be real, like, for the most part, like creating your own characters, like, I mean, and being represented by them is, like, I have my little golem character here, and that's like my logo. It's kind of like my signature, and it's a character I have an identity with. But with the stuff, it's like, oh, and I dress up as this person and I treat them like another personality that I talk to. In some cases, it can get pretty creepy, where it's just like, oh yeah, I just let this thing inhabit my body, and it takes over for a couple hours.
Or there's the other side of it too, where you have people that are like, this is my true self. And I'm like, maybe you don't feel like you're right in your skin, and a lot of people feel that way, but the answer isn't making new skin, right? I mean, there are healthier ways of going about figuring out what's going on that aren't going to lead you to, disassociate from your life and your choices. And I've seen people in the lifestyle that are like that.
I was just making it creepy. You're like, you don't need to get new skin. And I was like, bring me flesh.
Well, okay. So, Carl, let's go ahead and change the subject entirely here.
Great.
One of the things that's changed since the last time you were on the show was that I took a chance to go down and read Hullgrave. And I told you last week I want to see more of it. But I want to talk a little bit about your comic because it is just such a breath of fresh air in terms of what I've seen for webcomics out there. It's got some complexity to it. It's got a rich world that is hinted at. It's got great design. but it has a purity. And what I mean by that is it is an unironic adventure spirit to it. It's not tongue in cheek. It's not making fun of old fogies. It seems to have a genuine love of the simpler stories with complex underpinnings. What was your inspiration for creating that?
Well, it's sort of an inspiration soup, really. First off, I really love old Popeye cartoons, especially the Fleischer Brothers ones. I also happen to have a real interest in pulp adventure, like old pulp mag stuff, like Doc Savage and The Shadow and stuff like that. I especially like the oil painting covers on them that
Mhm.
just captured that sense of adventure with like the strapping big muscular men with like the collars like flared out. They're like holding a gun close to their face, looking over their shoulder while there's like a big snake behind them or something.
Right, right.
I love the spirit of those kinds of stories and illustrations. And I kind of wanted to combine those two things I loved, the goofier Sunday comic strip slash early cartoon vibe with that more slightly more down to earth serious adventure vibe that those old pulp stories had.
Well, I think you're doing a great job with chapter one of laying that out. It's got so much stuff going on there. I think one of the things that for me just really captures it for me is that and by the way, Marmaduke fan, thanks for showing up.
Thanks for having me on. Carl rocks. So I
feel
that
does indeed. But one of the things I think I really love about that personally about Holgrave is that I have a fascination with airships. It's not something that I've always had. About probably about 10, 15 years ago, I was reading about, I got a real curiosity about the names of the different airships. And so, like, what was dirigible, what does semi-rigid mean, all that kind of stuff. And so I started pouring into studying about airships and accidentally uncovered their history some. And the fact that the United States Navy used to have an airship division and stuff like that. And it became something that took me for a while, just fascinated me. And it's not something I've really had a chance to go back and revisit much because it's not like I'm going to book a ride or anything. But when I saw that your comic had featured all those sort of elements, I just really wanted to. It was fascinating to me.
Oh yeah, I'm very interested in air travel and airships myself, and I did a lot of research before making this comic, mostly because I was actually originally going to make a completely separate comic that takes place in the same universe. And it's sort of my baby, I guess you could say. It's a real passion project, so I decided to put that on hold because I'm like, you know what? I don't have enough experience to do this one idea justice. So I'll do a similar idea set in the same universe and make a comic based on that. And that's what Holgrave is.
So tell me a little bit about your universe, because I'm fascinated by fictional universes. I've been part of several of them, and one real one, at least. But
okay. So Marmaduke, you were.
Oh, sorry. I should mute myself. I was just chuckling at the gag.
Okay. So this universe that I created, it's a lot like ours. It had a very similar history up to a certain point. Long ago, a great catastrophe brought on by man's arrogance in messing with forces beyond their control caused parts of the world to split from the core. And that created a bunch of floating continents and islands orbiting around a giant ball of molten rock, jagged, like rocky areas, and water. So, naturally, mankind had to find a way around this. So, aviation became the primary means of travel. It's sort of their replacement for maritime travel, which is why, like, the pilots in this world are literally called sky sailors. The pirates are air pirates, and so on and so forth.
That is super interesting. So let me ask you this. So in this Earth, right? What do you know what kind of time frame the catastrophe happened in? Is it recent? Is it past? Or is that a big secret?
I'd say really, really, really far in the past. Like literally Tower of Babel type stuff.
Okay, okay. I can dig that. I can dig that a lot, actually. So is there enough water to sustain life on this planet? I mean, is that a danger that people will run into?
There is enough water on each of the floating continents and islands, like enough lakes and stuff, because they're ginormous. And thankfully, the precipitation, like the clouds and the rain, do replenish that supply. The actual surface below the islands, however, is a different story. You either have an ocean or completely barren wastelands.
Interesting. Very interesting. Very cool.
Yo, you guys were talking about shared universes a little while ago. My favorite shared universe is the one I share with you guys.
That's the worst.
That's very sappy, Matt. Thank you.
The other thing I've noticed is that I can't tell if Marmaduke's icon is a straitjacket or a key pal.
This one is a straitjacket. This is like the early days of Comicsgate. There was like some meme going around of like draw yourself in a lineup. And at the time I was just joking that in several of my videos, I had a running gag that I deserved to be locked up in an insane asylum. So I drew myself in a straitjacket for that meme. I think that was the first. Yep. And I think it's the first drawing I did of myself as Marmaduke fan. Because before this, I just had like a picture of the movie poster with the sunglasses on and a splato on my head.
That's actually really, really funny too, in a certain way, because we were just talking about personas before you came on.
Oh no! Would you believe if I said I swear I'm not a furry?
No, I absolutely would. I absolutely would. That's actually they're back in the early comic webcomic days. Of course, fur comics were a huge deal, and there was a certain subgroup of webcomicers who loved fur comics but didn't like furries, and who didn't think it should leave the page, that it stopped meaning something when you tried making it in real life. And
kind of the Star Fox effect, where you've got something really cool, but it's furry.
I'm sorry, what?
It's kind of, do you know what Star Fox is?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like that for me. Like as a kid, I was like, "Oh, this is the coolest thing ever." When you get older, and you realize what furries are, and you're like, "Oh God, they're gonna ruin." And they did.
Oh, they did more than ruin it, dude.
Yeah, they did some. They made the characters ruin each other. You know what I'm saying?
An internet group ruined the concept of anthropomorphic characters. We were going strong for about 10,000 years, and then they ruined it.
Well, one of the things I think is really funny about that, total side note off of Holgrave, and I want to get back to that, but I was talking to Doug Tenaple a couple weeks ago on Twitter, just not really lengthy. It's not like we're bros or anything, though. Wouldn't that be cool? But anyway, he had made a mention in a conversation about how prior to Rudyard Kipling, animals in fiction, in Western fiction specifically, weren't animals. They were ways of exploring different ways of human interaction. And so it wasn't about how the animals behaved. It was about how we as humans behaved. And that was the study on it. And that's something that I think is just so interesting, because when you look at the furry mentality, in a lot of ways, it's the inverse of that, where we try to take animal traits and foist them upon the human condition. And then what are we learning from that? You know, that's just something that's very interesting from a narrative study on that. But and one of the things that I mentioned to him, I gave a shout out to my buddy Rico. I don't know if you guys have followed Rico Kobos's comic, The Warehouse. It's about cute furry animals in prison.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
But it's really not about animals at all, right? And one of the things when Rico and I, when he was first working on it, when shortly after we first met, I told him one of the things I loved about his story is that because they're animals, we get to see them as people, and that follows into that pre-modernist animal story mold, where the animalness of them allows us to see the characters as people, not as prisoners. And I think that's really interesting for his story.
Not to take us more off topic from Carl's comic, but maybe that's kind of Zootopia's problem for me, is it's unclear whether we're supposed to read the Zootopia characters as animals or people, where like there's racism themes, but the racism themes don't really make sense because it's animal humor.
And then there's all the stuff about killer instincts and stuff like that. And you're like, it totally makes sense. And like the animal, they did used to kill each other, and then it becomes so unbelievable later in the movie that the guy's offended by even the mere notion of that. You're like, it's a reasonable place to jump.
Well, and then the question becomes, how does that fit into the culpability to criminal acts if we're applying that to human society? If they really are just instincts, then what can make it right or wrong?
I don't know. And see, that would be a thing, but I felt like the making them animals.
Well, they will. No, they could. That's not a theme that Disney could ever address. I mean, that's way above their weight. They'd be punching way above their weight, because in order to ask that question, you have to suppose the idea and posit the idea of moral absolutes. And they're not going to do that because it questions everything of their postmodernist agenda. So they can't. That's way above their weight.
No, actually, I loved Zootopia, especially, or I like the whole mystery angle of it a lot.
I love 90% of Zootopia. I really just don't like how awkward the race themes fit into it, but the character design, that's the most beautiful CGI movie I think I've seen, where I don't read them as like, like I can see the computer in a lot of CGI movies, and in that they just kind of felt like they were living, breathing things.
Actually, one thing I was going to talk about is something that impressed me a lot, even though this design-wise is very much, you can tell it was made in a computer. Good Dinosaur, not a good movie, but the CG in it was ridiculously good, like especially the water. I don't know, that's what I remember. Like, if anything I remember for that movie, I remember the drug scene and the water being really good looking.
I did not see Good Dinosaur.
You weren't missing anything.
You were missing a few pretty visuals and
a drug scene.
And a very emotionally incoherent story. Like, the tone went all over the place.
So, like,
a lot of kids were bothered by it. Like, a lot of apparently across the country, little kids that saw the film were bothered by it because the dinosaur cries throughout almost the entire movie.
Well, that's just like watching a movie with me. Goodness sakes. I saw this, I joke a little bit, but I'm infamous on the stream on Aquaman. I was in tears. It's just such a touching story. And there were many, many moments last weekend watching Alita Battle Angel that had me choked up. I tell you, there's it's a great movie. I'm not going to tell you the end of it, but it'll really twist the knife. Let me tell you.
Well, good. Finally, I've been wanting an excuse to see Alita. And
the only one I want to hear, Marmaduke, haven't seen it yet.
I really want to see it. I wasn't too interested at first, and then as stuff came along, and when the trailer started rolling out, when I first saw like some commercials and stuff like that, and I was like, I thought the eyes looked. I still do. I thought the eyes looked ridiculous. That it looked way too silly and cheesy, like going for that anime look. That they forgot that some things work better on paper instead of in on the camera. And over time, like when I actually saw some of the stuff, especially in some of the recent like YouTube trailers and stuff like that, where I see these cool battle scenes and stuff like that, I was like, oh, I'm actually thinking about going to see this. And the more I see about it with this recent controversy with Captain Marvel, and people are saying this is how you do it right, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'll give it a look. And they're promoting a lot of things. It's not just about, this movie isn't for you white guys out there. This is for all the women and people, and this is the terrible world you've created for women who live in fear of being told that's really impressive. I can't even lift that. Like, I don't know. That she's like the most, I don't know. I do not like Brie Larson, especially after this recent stuff where she's just like complaining about the most petty things. Like it's, having her rights stripped away is someone making a comment like, "Can I have your number?"
Yeah, it's that's a whole.
That's
Brie
an
Larson
insult to
lives
women
in a world.
because there are real issues that women face from, walking down. Just like you walk down the street and like there are legit things that do happen to women where they get talked down to, or someone makes a derogatory comment to them that you shouldn't punish legally, but it is rude. And then her rude comment is, "This guy asked me for my number. This guy told me that's really impressive. I can't even lift that."
This guy treated me like an attractive rich woman.
Yeah, like it's her whole thing is like, "Oh, I'm so hashtag oppressed." Like, the other people when they just try to say something, like they'll cite some story. Sometimes it's fake, sometimes it's not. They'll say this is a true, or like this is a hardship that the African American community faces in America, or this is the hardships of women in America, or something. And it's sometimes they're being obtuse and it's really not that bad, or sometimes it's something taken way out of context, but it's still way more believable than this guy asked me for my phone number.
Well, we don't really need to talk about believable stories anymore. I think that the Jussie Smollett situation has sort of set the bar on that one.
Well, also with the Covington kids, like there was talk in my school the other day, and my teacher, who I don't even think is like, I think he's like left leaning, but he was upset by a lot of this recent stuff in the news, and I think that kind of says something about how it's spreading with kind of sensation. Not like not like the news is all bad, because I feel like this is going to be one of those things people take me out of context way later saying something like this. But the sensationalist news, like everything done for money instantly. It's got to be out without a second thought. It's got to be rushed out the door, and it creates this false narrative that turns out completely wrong. Oh, so we just completely ruined these kids' lives for the next couple of weeks. We've gotten their schools shut down for a little bit because they're threatened. And it's completely on them for jumping at it, and especially on people like Kathy Griffin, who said, "I want start releasing the private information of these children, like where they lived," and said, "Well, if you think that they wouldn't do it to you, you're wrong." And I'm like, "Lady, how old are you? You're like 60. You're acting like a friggin' 10-year-old."
Well, the real question for me is, like, said they wouldn't do what? They wouldn't join along when I start singing in public? Oh, darn.
Like, that was just, yeah. Oh, no, her whole thing was like, if you think they wouldn't dox you, like, as in if these kids were in her position, they totally dox people. Because, comparing yourself to, well, firstly, comparing yourself to an immature teenager is totally the route you want to be going, Kathy. And secondly, like, why?
Well,
in the first place?
This is way off topic here, but one thing I want to say with it, I just want to point out to the most bizarre aspect of the modern world, right? Is because we are so connected and because we are all so rich, we have this misapprehension that we have really any business delving into the personal lives of people we contact on the internet. I mean, everybody at this table right now, I followed you on Twitter. I've seen your art. I've seen your content. I like you guys, but I'm not inviting you to my kid's birthday party, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's weird.
I know.
Cake, Reese.
It's a hard truth, but at the most, we're pleasant acquaintances, right? To imagine that Kathy Griffin believes she has any relationship to these kids. She wasn't involved in the incident at play. She doesn't know them. She's not friends with anyone that was involved in the play. She doesn't live in DC. She doesn't live in Kentucky. She has zero relationship to the situation, but she believes she has a valid opinion because she saw it on the internet.
Well, like,
to be fair, she might be paying for all their colleges very soon.
Oh yeah, they're going. I think she's on the top of their list. Like, these kids, saw what they did, especially when she, other people were like, "Oh, maybe that's too far." The one Disney producer, I think, deserves it as well. He, the one that drew them being pushed into a wood chipper.
Yep.
Yeah, that was effed up.
Oh, I couldn't believe he still had a job at Disney after. Like, I know Disney leans left, but I was like in shock that he wasn't out on the street, like, just get your stuff and be out by
5. Okay. Let's reel it back in.
Okay.
So
Let's see.
leave the heavy governmental theory and all that stuff aside for a second. Let's talk back about Holgrave. So,
Awesome.
Carl, in your world there, first of all, do you have a setting, like a time period setting for Holgrave?
Imagine a time period similar to the early 1900s.
See, I was feeling like 1920s was right about where it hit.
Yes, that is exactly around the area I was aiming for.
Very cool. I'm glad. See, I picked up on that, and I love that. So, what's the geopolitical situation on this broken Earth like? I mean, is there an America? Is there a hope for humanity there?
It isn't explicitly called the United States of America, but there is a country that's a lot like America. Like, all of the real world countries do have equivalents, I would say.
Cool. Sweet.
I did want to welcome, we have a viewer, Zach Hawkins, has joined in the chat. We're talking about Kathy Griffin probably looks and probably smells like Satan. I hope I never get to find out what that smells like.
Yeah. Well,
I think he'd be really crazy.
I honestly, and this is going to go out there. This is a little fringe there, Zach. I'm going to say though that being as Satan is an incorporeal, hell beast or whatever you want to say, that he's not part of our time domain as such. I don't think that he smells in the way that our senses can perceive.
Yeah.
So
I've always thought about that.
I would like to imagine that Kathy Griffin also has no odor, and it allows me to sleep better at night in the same way. So.
But yeah, like I was actually thinking about that the other day. Like, you go to heaven, and all of a sudden you see these colors that just didn't exist. You're smelling, or like you're experiencing things that you never thought possible.
Yeah. There was I'm going to forget his name. This is totally off subject. Sorry, Carl, but this is a fun little tidbit, I think. That there is of course, we don't know how much dimensionality there actually is to the universe, right? We know that there's at least 4 dimensions. There's probably more. Some theoretical physicists think there's like 12. There was in the Middle Ages, there was a Jewish rabbi who believed that there were 12 realms of creation, right? There was the uncreated, there was the realm of God beyond that, but in creation, he believed there were 12 realms that we would call dimensions, and that only 4 of those were accessible to humans, and the rest make up our incorporeal selves, like our spirits, our emotions, all that stuff is not part of our dimensionality. That it is our physical dimensions. It is beyond that. I'm not sure if I buy it, but it makes for a great basis for science fiction.
That's an interesting concept. I might have to use that in the future.
Yeah. So I don't have any plans to use it, but so in the world of Holgrave, you've got an alternate history. You've got the universe shape of the world anyway shaping up geopolitically differently. You've got these forces, this nature. How long do you think this story is going to happen in? I mean, do you have a timetable for how long it's going to play out?
Holgrave specifically, not too long, but that's just one story in this huge universe.
Right.
Holgrave, I'm planning on basically having 4 major chapters.
Okay.
Maybe I'll add on an epilogue after that, but that's the plan for now.
Very cool.
Also, although Holgrave will end, this will not be the last time you see the characters in Holgrave. I plan on using them in the future for a lot of things.
Oh, cool! Very cool.
Thanks, Kanye. Very cool.
Now, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of sequel series, so I think that's really great.
I was planning on taking Nathan, Terrence, and Patrick, the main 3 characters in Holgrave, and sort of Indiana Jonesing them up in the sense that they're just my go-to adventure characters, and just have them go on weird adventures in different parts of this crazy world.
That is so cool.
In fact, I was actually sort of planning a second story after Wholegrave, where Nathan and Terrence are trying to go back home, and Patrick's with them, and they end up in what is basically this universe's equivalent to Transylvania.
Okay.
And they encounter this Frankenstein type guy who is actually a seemingly very benevolent, and he believes he's benevolent too, because he's capturing, killing, and removing all these crazy, creepy like old-timey monsters from the surrounding town so they don't eat people. But in the long run, that scientist's actions actually prove to be detrimental, because the thing about the monsters is that they're created for a specific purpose. The monsters eats bad people. Like, you know, all those stories about, hey, Jimmy, be a good kid, or this monster or Krampus is gonna like eat you alive or something. It's basically like that. They weed out the terrifying aspects of society, and because this man has like removed this force of nature from these these seemingly evil monsters, the nearby town has actually sort of run into a problem, because all of the business people and the citizenry and the politicians are terrible people now.
Politicians being terrible people doesn't sound like something changing. Oh
my goodness. Carl, you need to draw faster.
But he's a busy lad.
No, that sounds so much fun. I can't even get. I don't mean to just gush, but these.
He's got a lot of cool stuff lined up.
Yeah.
You can tell just even with just the even with just his first issue that he's put up, and I believe you said you put up a snippet of episode 2, right?
Not yet, but I'm going to start posting episode 2 in snippets. I'm adapting. Do any of you? I know Matt does, but are any of you familiar with the webcomic artist Deputy Rust? I'm sort of adapting his model for posting webcomics, where you have an episode and you post that episode in individual parts, so you can just like you make 4 pages, you put that out as episode whatever, part whatever. And I'm going to do that for Wholegrave this time.
Yeah, no, I've seen that used before. So, but I tend to do one update at a time on our comics. Sometimes that makes a real pinch, though, trying to get a weekly schedule up. But and also lights the fires. Make sure you do something.
Yeah.
Carl is good at lighting fires. He has a record at the police station.
I don't, I swear.
You ever wonder if like the police ever get like just really crass about something, like they've just got, it's like, wanted for theft, mugging, and then just they write asshole like on one guy's sticker or like on one guy's sheet.
Well, they're not allowed to do that, because that.
Can you imagine if someone just got like they lost it, like they were just pissed and probably
I could see
out.
some policemen doing that. They probably wouldn't get away with it, but I can.
And I would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for you and your meddling kids.
Yeah, the problem with something like that is that's what gets people off in court.
So you referred to this man as an asshole.
Yep.
What did he even do to warrant this?
How do we know that you aren't dealing with this under prejudice? Blah, 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 blah.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking about the other day when Edwin shared. It's like you guys can if you're having any doubts about the situation, you can contact the police. I believe it was Honolulu police or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And it had a 1-star rating on Google reviews. It's like 11 out of 10. And I was making the joke. It's like, oh, they locked me up because I sat or because I mugged some bitch. 0 out of 10, or would not recommend.
I can't imagine a police office is ever going to get a positive review.
Reviews. Well, a lot of them, like I remember, if it's anything that's like sort of politicized in any way, like say a meat processing plant or nuclear or a nuclear reactor or something like that, a nuclear power plant. There's always bad reviews. Like my brother, we were driving through Pennsylvania. At one point, we saw this large nuclear plant in the background or in the way off in the distance. We're like, oh hey, we looked it up on our phones, and then it brings it up on the map. It's got like 1-star reviews, and then my brother's like, what? He clicks on it, and it's like, you guys are killing the planet and all this other stuff. So like, it's always taken to people that have something negative to say. You know, if you get a good pizza at Pizza Hut, you're not gonna go like, oh yeah, let's give them a 5-star review. But if you get a bad pizza, you're like, oh, I'll really show them. I'm gonna go in there and give them a 1-star review.
Yeah.
At least like every 10 negative people, there's like maybe 1 good comment.
Well, people don't usually complain about things they like, so that's the thing.
And that's the tea.
So, Marmaduke, I finally went back and watched the rest of your Jawbreakers review once my copy came.
Sorry I spoiled that for you, by the way. Shoot.
Yeah.
I thought I was getting good at that too, doing the spoiler warning thing.
Yeah.
Oh, did you guys want to talk Jawbreakers?
Well, yeah. I was just gonna talk a little bit about his review rather than about the book as a whole. So if you guys haven't read it, we can go ahead and hold that off. But
okay, I don't know, like just the stuff that's been kind of surface. You guys want to get into kind of the surface level of that, though?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the book as a whole.
There were some parts like there are some things that you could tell he wasn't like. I don't know how this is going to come off, but like you could tell he wasn't a comic reader or a comic writer. And that's both a good thing and a little off-putting because it's structured a little differently than almost anything I'm used to. Or at the very least, it's kind of written that, or maybe I'm just really biased and I can kind of see Richard sitting there typing it at his computer.
He's written a couple indie projects before this, just not like
I was never interested in Iron Sights. It just seemed a little too like. I don't know. I always gravitate towards the really weird and really wacky. Like I don't want to say creative because I feel like that'd be really mean to say about someone's project. But, you know, like the really out there things, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. You know, where it's like just crazy in the concept alone.
Iron Sights is very boilerplate. It's in terms of that, it's your basic, you know, guns action adventure. There's not a lot of. It's a good story. But it doesn't break any new ground. If you watched a Tarantino movie, you've seen all of the elements that make Iron Sights there. If you watched,
I'm imagining Kill Bill done by Richard Meyer.
Yeah, it's like that. There's a little bit of different flavor because it, you know, because of it deals with veterans in a way that is honest but not necessarily flattering.
That's what I've kind of seen is that. Because some people were saying, it's like, oh, look, he says the C word. That means he hates women. And I was kind of like, oh, this is, I can kind of see it was from the couple panels they were sharing. I was like, oh, it's kind of like an insight to what this is.
Yeah, they're just, there's some, Iron Sights is about some bad people doing bad stuff, you know. I will say the pacing in the first act is a bit of a mess. But the story is solid if that's your kind of thing. One of the things that I think is the most telling from the reviews I've seen, a lot of people seem to be missing the point because it's a hopeless story, right? There's no redemption arc that's part of it because the characters are so flawed that there isn't redemption on the table. It's not like Goodfellas. It's more like Faust. You know, the deal with the devil was made in the first part. It was made before the movie started, before the show started. But I mean, it's you know, more like Breaking Bad than it is like I can't think of another project right now, but yeah. But yeah, I enjoyed it though. Yeah, it's if you enjoy that kind of thing, then you'll enjoy that kind of thing. I guess if that makes sense.
Let me think. And when it came to other stuff, now when it comes to like reviews, talking or like reviews, if you're talking about the ones that I'm thinking about with Iron Sights, those people weren't really going to give it a fair shot in the first place. Like genuine critics, like say if it was somebody, like say if me or Marmaduke or Carl were to say something negative about it, it would have more weight than a lot of the critics, because a lot of them kind of jump on stuff like, you know, they jump on Ethan Van Sciver for having bad art.
Yeah, I can't get that. The minute you said that, you lost the argument.
Are you looking at it upside down through like mirrored glasses or something?
Yeah.
Well, the thing about looking at art upside down is that that's actually a valid way to.
Well, that's a valid way to, like, I realized that after I said it. But yeah, you turn it upside down, you put some funky glasses on, have a couple of quick shots at the Kia, and then you can really start seeing everything kind of float apart.
Well, see what happens is you have your tequila and then oops, spilled it all over the comic, and you just it's illegible, the ink run, poor quality paper.
Well, yeah, like I'm trying to sit there because like, you know, I have my own biases, everyone does, but I sit there and I think, you know, even if I disagree with this person, like I'm trying to think about a good example. Like Scott Snyder. I actually like Scott Snyder stuff. I think it's sometimes it can be dumb fun, and sometimes it's just really fun on its own, like just straight up. And like even when I disagree with him, even when he's called me a hate group, or like, you know, I'm a hate monger or whatever else. I hate women and gays, to put it bluntly. And I see that, and I'm still saying, like, even if I'm not very happy with what you're saying, I still appreciate you as a artist in this sense. You know, someone who produces content. I still think you're talented. Even with Tom King, like, you know, I've been trash talking him a lot lately, but I think that's because they keep making him bigger and bigger. They keep giving him more stuff, but he's talented. But I don't, like, you know, I'm trying to be honest with them. Like, I feel like that's much more important than just saying, "Oh, lol, look, this person put something out and it looks terrible." I don't know.
Well, I totally, I mean, I totally know what you're getting at with that. Is there's this separation of the art and the artist, and I think that there is a certain import to that. I do think there are limits to that, because we as patrons get to decide who we support, and I think that's something that a lot of folks seem to forget. The customer is not just a customer; the customer is a patron. We are. I mean, that when people talk about, you know, and I actually got in a very interesting discussion with a Scottish art teacher several months ago about it. But a customer, when it comes to the arts, we're not just consumers. We're not just customers. We are in fact patrons. We are purchasing a specific kind of thing that we want to meet our specifications. You know, and it's not. And when you're purchasing an art, it's not like purchasing a hot dog, right? If you go to McDonald's and you could get service, you walk out, you go across the street to Burger King and you have yourself a different burger, but you're eating a very similar thing, right? Or if you find yourself short on cash and you can't afford Burger King, then you can always pick up a pack of hot dogs at the Walmart, right? I mean, there are choices we have as customers. But when you're purchasing art, which is a luxury, you don't want to purchase something that doesn't meet your standard for good, right? Because it's a luxury item. And that's something that people forget, is that the comic books are luxury items. They're not necessities. They're not there to supply our needs for living. They're luxury items. And I'm a patron. I am not going to put money down on something that offends me.
Very well said.
Yeah. See, my thing is, while I do have a lot of these guys where I'm like, yeah, this person called me a Nazi without really getting to know me. This person's kind of, you know, they've called me a Nazi, but they're not really, you know, they've just, like, I don't consider, like, I'm not one of the people that's ready to throw Don Cates out to the wolves just yet. Because, yeah, I don't like him being dismissive and everything, but, you know, he didn't say, oh, go eat a boot covered in shit and die and go suffocate and, you know, all these other things. He doesn't continuously rally against me all the time. He doesn't say, if you vote this way, you're a terrible person. Like, that's somebody I'd still be willing to support, even with denouncement and trash talking. But when it comes to somebody like Mags or Gale or Richard Pace, like where they're just insufferable, or John Lehman especially, I don't want to support them whatsoever. Like, and then when it comes to politics itself, I don't really like the idea of just based on how they vote alone. Like, you'd have to do something personally that would get me to upset you. But like, you know, if this person's just a Democrat and they believe in this, and they post, it's like, I'm supporting this person because I believe in fighting bigotry and racism in my hometown. Like, I'm just, okay, you know, I disagree with what you constitute as racism, bigotry, but you know, I still respect you. You're being respectful to me by not wishing my death, which it kind of feels like that's sad, the standard that we fall into. That's respectful. So I'll continue to support you.
Yeah, that is kind of a low bar, but
you ever see that picture, Carl? And I hope that, like, I'm gonna be a little more crass than usual. You ever see that picture? It's like a person holding up a sign, I think in protest of Trump, but it was like, our expectations were low, but holy fuck. You ever see that picture?
One of the few examples of something on the left actually becoming a legitimate meme.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not really like, I know that we've all have very strong opinions about these things, and you know, we're all come from a background that, but when it comes to judging liberals, like, I don't like to immediately condemn or anything else, or just kind of throw them out, because some of them do have things that I'm interested in hearing about or really understanding their point of view. The people I can't stand, this extends to the right wing as well, are the people that take it so seriously that they let it interfere with their families, with their hobbies. Like, you know, the idea that people were upset with Doug TenNapel, it's like, I found out he's a right winger, I won't support him. And like, that's just petty. That's silly. It's like when you're a kid, it's like, oh, well, I heard this person doesn't like the Jonas Brothers, so they're not cool anymore. We're not going to sit with them. I'm 10 years out of being a kid. I don't know what it means anymore.
I think I think there's a couple of elements with that. There was, I do not remember his name. There's a PragerU video that was put out a couple weeks ago with Owen Benjamin, the comedian, about why people aren't getting along. And the premise of his video is that when people have the same goals, that they can, you know, find a middle ground because they have the same goals. And when you look at American liberals and American conservatives, that many of them, and I mean true liberals, on this case in a classic sense, have similar goals. They believe in private property rights. They believe in, you know, taking care of your business. They believe in, you know, being able to hold down work and even being generous and kind to people. Those are common goals. But when you look at the concept of the right versus the left, and what those really come down to is that a leftist is not the same as a liberal, because the left's worldview doesn't acknowledge private property rights. It does acknowledge the rights of free association or free speech. The totalitarian falls under that realm when you really break those ideas down. And so they don't have the same goals, and they can't have conversations. And one of the things we see in the modern political climate is that there is an entire generation of people that have been indoctrinated into thinking, actually probably 3 generations of people that have been indoctrinated into thinking that liberal and left are the same. And because of that, we have people that, you know, are just big government people, but becoming totalitarians in their thinking. And that's why I reject the idea that the alt-right is a thing, because
it is like a label that gets applied way too broadly, but they do actually exist, like the genuine, like,
you're misunderstanding me, Matt. There are people that claim to be alt-right, but every position that the alt-right holds is a leftist position.
You mean like ethno states and things like that?
Yeah. I mean, it's collectivist, groupthink, big government,
racial identity politics.
it is a proto-socialist position. That the government needs to come in and bail out this group of people instead of this group of people. We need to make sure that these needs are being met. It is an anti-liberty, pro-slavery position. And that slavery is not necessarily in terms of owning people, but in terms of the state owning people. Where instead of people being responsible for maintaining themselves, it is the state or the society that is responsible for maintaining them. It is a leftist position in every stripe.
I never thought about it like that. I don't know if I would go, because to me, my experience with the alt-right is a lot of them are like, I imagined, like, some of my like right-wing family members, but if you amplified them up to like 11, or like they say some of the same things, but then they like these people go off the deep end.
Mm-hmm.
But I never thought about it from that kind of perspective, because you're kind of thinking about it from a larger scale than I am.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that this is way off the subject of comics. Oh my goodness. But one of the things that it's been probably almost 10 years ago, I was first actually probably 12 years ago, so I was first exposed to the concept of the political compass, right? And for whatever reason, it didn't come up when I was in school. But the talking about the right-left paradigm, and then people looking at authoritarian versus libertarian governance and everything else. And these sociologists and political scientists said that on the one side, on the extreme left, was communism, and on the extreme right was National Socialism.
Nazism.
Right? But the thing is that the actual governing positions of the National Socialists, of the Nazis, were virtually identical to those of the communists.
Oh, you'd like the video I did on one of Hitler's speeches. It was like to the metal workers. I just like went through his speech and talked about, well, here's the rhetoric he used. Mm-hmm. What does he sound like? He's always complaining about these Western capitalist imperialists. That's the thing he hates. He hates Westernism. He hates capitalism. He hates democracy. He hates imperialists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I actually watched that one. Yeah. But one of the things about that is and all of his rhetoric was, and then I've had people say, well, he talked like a socialist and he ruled like a capitalist because he didn't take the government, the companies away from the plutocrats. But the problem with that is they weren't allowed to run their companies. Berlin ran their companies, told them what they were going to produce, what kind of materials they could use, what they could pay for those materials. It was all done by the government. So it's still running from the top down, regardless of who owns it. It doesn't matter who owns something on paper if you don't control it, right? If I can't build a shed in my backyard, is it really my backyard, or does it belong to the HOA, right? That's part of the issue on those sort of things. Is freedom and self-ownership and being able to associate with who you want. Those are right-leaning ideas. And so when you look at the terms right and left came out of the terror, right? The period after the quote unquote French Revolution, where the quote unquote common man decided they were just going to murder everybody and take their stuff, right? I have no patience for the French terror.
Very Burkean of you.
Very true. See, and I never thought about it from that perspective. I always thought about it's like, oh, well, they kind of say things like, I don't think that this person's a Nazi. I can see where these people say where they get the idea from, even if it's grossly grossly blown out of proportion.
Right. And so the right and left in France, I'll just real quick on this, the left wing were proto-socialists. They were the Republicans, the French Republicans, which, they believed in common property. They didn't believe anyone could own titles or land. They didn't believe anyone was bound by law they couldn't understand. They built a religion to reason, but it was really just an excuse to have orgies in old churches. Yeah, it was pretty gross. And I'm simplifying a little bit on that. The right wing in the House there, in their Senate, were former royalists who wanted to return governance away from Paris and back to capable people out in the country. Because at the time, everything was being run from Paris. And these former royalists, these right wingers, said no. Let's divest power back to not even to the people, but to the a new aristocrats out in the countries because they can run in the counties because they can run themselves, and we don't have any business running them. And they were pro-Catholic Church, and they were pro keeping former nobles alive and not just killing them and all that kind of stuff. And so it wasn't complete freedom, right? It was still under the vestments of feudalism, but it was a portion of freedom, and that was the difference between right and left, right? At that time. And it didn't go anywhere outside of France until the progressive era here in America, when the former Communist Party, which became the Progressive Party, which became the progressive wing of the Democrat Party, decided he started using the right and left paradigm and apply that to American politics. But all of American politics, except for the communists, were so far right, they were practically anarchists at the time, right? And the big fight was between whether or not between the other Americans and the extreme early libertarians was whether or not the federal government had any right to tax at all. That was the debate that was going on at the time by people like Lysander Spooner and all that kind of stuff. And so we have a situation here where Americanism, American constitutionalism, is so far right from the rest of the world that we can't even see how far that is. But especially since the 60s and hardcore since the 70s, we have been deluded as a nation to think that our politics is somehow more like Europe or more like Africa than it actually is, and to blur the lines between what right and left can even mean in a coherent state, right? Because if you take the principle, this was part of my looking at this. If you took the principles of the Republican Party, even the most extreme Republicans, and you stretched it to the farthest logical extreme, you're never going to run into Nazism, right?
Because there's something fundamentally different about American
fundamentally
tradition.
different about it. You're going to run into anarchy before you run into Nazism. You're going to run into first. And because the only thing that makes a difference, it's not who owns what or how economics works, because economics is an outgrowth of our personal freedom, and freedom is the mark that determines whether something is right or left or just or unjust. And you can't have perfect freedom in a society because there's duty and stuff like that. And there are limits to what can be done. And societies, there will always be taxes. But freedom is how much freedom a people has is the only marker that makes any difference when it comes to economics or governance. And they're not really that different, because economics grows out of the fact that people relate together, and all that politics is the relationship of people in society.
That was heavy.
That was nice. That was a good speech.
So, Carl, does Holgrave have a Republican left and a aristocrat right?
I've actually read the scripts earlier. I can tell you, I got them out of Carl's pocket while he wasn't looking.
Over the internet.
Over the internet. I've actually got these really long, nasty hands. You probably don't want to work on them.
Actually, funny thing about that, the version, the in-universe equivalent to America does have a sort of Republican and Democratic Party in a sense, but their function works a bit differently. Basically, imagine that the equivalent to the Democratic Party comes up with all the ideas, and the equivalent to the Republican Party sort of tests them, like they're the filter of the new ideas. Like, hey, the Democrat equivalent is essentially progressive in the most literal sense imaginable. They create new ideas and are thinking
throw everything at the wall.
The Republican equivalents are conservative in the most literal sense of the word, and since that they're all about preserving order, tradition, morality, and are basically just the deciding factor for, okay, well, they alone don't get to decide. There is like I haven't ironed out all the ideas for how that kind of political state would even work in my head.
Actually,
Go ahead.
I haven't like worked out all my ideas for that, but that's the basic idea. That's the gist of it.
Matt, were you going to say something?
oh no, I like that. It's 'cause I've always felt like these two groups kind of keep each other in check, especially with how things bounce back and forth every couple of years.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely
This actually is a little misleading because as the years go on and Carl becomes an angrier person, he's actually writing in that Nathan is gonna go up and he's gonna like, and all the progressive people, they're gonna be portrayed as stupid and immoral, and then he's gonna go up and say, "You guys are just like, you'll never understand," and then he's just gonna like punch them in the face or something.
Marmaduke, you were going to say something?
That cut out, Matt.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna give you the floor. It sounded like you were about to say something profound.
Yeah, what I was gonna say was what you're clicking with is sort of sounds like there's a separation of powers, but the separation of powers is for two different ideologies, which is just kind of interesting because like every functional country has at least a little separation of powers. Are you a Babylon 5 fan at all, Carl?
Nope. I have never seen that show once in my life.
Too bad.
That's not got a cool name.
I saw it once and did not like it.
You didn't like it, okay?
No.
I
only saw it once, so
it has its flaws. I think its best virtue is its worst problem. The best part about Babylon 5 is how seedy the world is. It's very much a reflection of 90s American politics. So I like that it feels like kind of a down to earth sci-fi universe. And then the dumbest aspect of it is sometimes the 90s politics, you kind of roll your eyes, say, really, that's what people are going to be arguing about in the year 2258. I was just going to say that there's an alien society in Babylon 5 that has a caste that's just for war and a caste that's just for religion, and so they have completely different worldviews, but they also have completely different powers too.
I was actually thinking about how interesting your talk about the people came up with ideas and to try them out, because in the this is in the weeds again, but in the American system, part of the reason that the founders settled on a republic was because each of the states could try out ideas of governance, and then we could see how it worked out.
Yep.
So some had more freedom, some had less freedom, some were run like I live in Nebraska. We're the only state with a unicameral, right? Instead of having a Senate and a House, we only have a unicameral, and that gives the people the option of putting forward legislation that can be voted up or down, and it also can rescind legislation based on popular vote. And so that's a unique setup that Nebraska has, and it works okay because there aren't there's not more than 2 million people in the state total. So it works out okay that way. If we had 10 million people in the state, it would be an unruly system. But because we're so rural, it works. But yeah, so there are things that I think talking about that is a really intriguing idea. The only And you wouldn't even have to address this in the inside of a story because it's not an actual government. But if you were actually going to try something like that, maintaining the purity of the parties would be the thing that would be difficult, because people's views tend to change over time, and I don't think it would work well otherwise.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think is really interesting about that is that the purpose, one of the structures of the federal government was set up specifically to keep people from being able to pass laws effectively, because the founders figured that human beings love power too much. So the fact that you're thinking about people that always want to say nope, nope, no, I think that's a really good dynamic.
Yeah. And the funny thing is that I got that idea from an old Mark Twain quote. He said, what was the quote? It was something along the lines of, radicals come up with new ideas, conservatives adopt them. And in spite of being a very conservative person myself, I kind of chuckled at that. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of right. But I don't necessarily think that's a terrible thing.
Yeah.
It also kind of ties into Jordan Peterson talking about how the liberal mindset, because they question things, they innovate ideas, but the conservative mindset, because they organize, they're the ones who actually you need to manage the crazy idea that liberals come up with. So he was applying that to economics. So that I can kind of see that paralleling with what Carl's talking about a little bit.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's your governmental structure is very insightful, and it's going to give a lot of people pause if they stop to think about that much.
I also don't feel like it's beating you over the head or really insulting or belittling. So I feel like that's easier to swallow than, I don't know. I remember Weaponized Nerd Rage. I got in a bit of a fight with it, or not like a fight, but like a discussion with him about the first episode of Doom, or the first issue of Doomsday Clock. There was just this thing where, like, you know, it was a lot of stuff I thought, like, that I perceived, and honestly I still do, as modern politics crammed into 1992 post this, you know, fake end of the world scenario. And there's a lot of it where it's just like, but the president doesn't care. He just got a hole in one, and the country doesn't care because they hate people who aren't just like them. And I'm like, damn it. But that felt patronizing. This doesn't. Like, and that's what I think you really, I think you've gone in the right direction tackling politics in your book.
Well, it's not within this story specifically, but it's within multiple stories that I'm planning on taking place in this universe.
Yeah, I think it's important for stories that politics, even in-universe politics, tends to be kind of at a glance, kind of at a sideline, because you know, there's a reason that C-SPAN doesn't get the ratings. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The reason why I was okay with like having something so overtly political as that in my fictional universe at all was because it was a natural part of the world. It was world building, essentially.
Well, and there are lots of times and places and stories where that sort of thing can work out really well too. Like on like the cliche of the people coming to the reading of the will and find out that they have to spend a night in a haunted house, right? Which is a wonderful cliche. But with it, I mean, there's always this, you know, boring, you know, scene with the lawyer, and, you know, sometimes played for laughs, sometimes it's serious, whatever. But it is not of itself interesting. What's interesting is the people's reactions to it and the scenario in which they find themselves thereafter. So I can see lots of scenarios for your characters to learn about their structure of their government without having it to be, you know, like reading a civics book.
And there's also an organization in here that's basically like, I don't want to call it Strawman UN, but it's basically my imagination running wild. It's just like, okay, what's the worst possible scenario if the UN doesn't pan out and becomes like a worse system than it is now? And now they're sort of going to be a kind of annoyance to heroes in a completely separate series of stories that take place within the same universe.
So like you're not UN, which for my money you could lambast all day long. I wouldn't care.
Well, my idea of this type of UN is not that it gets nothing done or it's completely ineffective or pointless, but that it gets too much done and it's too much of a pest and a nuisance in all of the surrounding countries' affairs.
That's exactly how I feel about the real UN. Anyway, but I can't remember my point now after making my snide UN comment. I can't remember where I was at. So, other than you've talked about about Hullgrave itself, you've talked about the Indiana Jones adventure sequels on that. Are there other genres you want to touch on in your stories?
Yes, especially in this universe with the Indiana Jones style adventures. Like I could go anywhere. Like there's a heavy supernatural element in Holgrave as well. It just hasn't really manifested itself yet. Like Holgrave deals with like the concepts of like greed and life and death, which is why the Grim Reaper is an actual character in the story later on. You'll see.
Spoiler alert.
The Grim Reaper is actually just a allegory for the tax man. I've read Carl's scripts. I snatched them out again.
Well, the interesting thing about the Grim Reaper is that I examined like the idea of the Grim Reaper in culture, and it's always portrayed as a villain for some reason. And I don't like the point of the Grim Reaper is that he's basically the angel of death. Like he harvests souls and brings them to the grave. So my version of the Angel of Death or the Grim Reaper is just that. He's not a bad guy. He is actually inherently a good thing.
I'm just gonna check the chat really quick. No new messages. So
I was gonna say there's a theological bone to pick there, Carl, but I'm not gonna do that today. I've spent entirely too much time in the weeds here, so.
I get lost in the weeds myself. Oh wait, you're talking about something else.
Now we're all curious. Okay, Carl, are you interested in hearing Matt's passion about the Angel of Death?
Yeah, no, there's a whole thing I don't want to get into right now. So this is my way of it's sort of like a hook for next episode, right? So I probably won't talk about it next episode. We don't have guests lined up, so who knows who we'll have there. But so okay. I noticed the time is 8:30, thereabouts, here in my little hamlet. So I'm going to go ahead and thank you very much, Carl, for your patience and for all of your answers. And I'm very much anxious to anticipate Holgrave Chapter 2, Part 1. And make sure you put that on Twitter when it's up there, and I will share that all over the place because I'm stoked. Gotcha. So I'm going to go ahead and I want to turn the camera, so to speak, over to Marmaduke directly because I have some questions about your channel for you. So I have been really, 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 really enjoying your. I mentioned this last time you were on very briefly, but your retellings, your narrative tellings of fairy tales and folklore. That's great content. At least I think so. Have you been getting much feedback from other people on that?
I started doing fairy tales because I had a long-standing interest in them, and like I had all these kids on my channel, right? And so I sort of realized, well, shoot, I can't do like a little kid video game one day and then do the politics of Adolf Hitler for my next video. So I'm gonna make this channel like a kind of a family-friendly like story channel, right? And since I already had like this interest in folklore, I just decided I'm going to go hunt for as much public domain stuff as I can find. And since then, I've been discovering lots of stuff I never knew existed. Like I just found this collection of Czechoslovakian fairy tales, and they're beautifully written. They're very clever, and it's just it's like that meme where one person is labeled like dumb people on the internet who make me mad, and then the other girl is labeled millions of terabytes of interesting information. There's just so much interesting information and stories that's just available for free on the internet. I've just been so excited because I keep finding more and more and more.
So is there a particular like branch of myth that you find more interesting than others, or is it all an equally wonderful grab bag?
Gosh, well, the nice thing for the fairy tales about me is, you know, they're just nice and short. I kind of like having a nice digestible little thing because the longer something is, like the more into the weeds I can get. Like I'll read a chapter of the Iliad and I'll say, oh boy, this is really interesting. And then I'll say, okay, now I want to read a chapter of the Aeneid. And then I'll forget to finish, you know, the Iliad or the Aeneid, right? So I like that the fairy tales can like speak to my attention deficit disorder, I think, where I can get like a nice little digestible bite-sized bit. But I am interested in, you know, like larger format myths as well. I think what's interesting to me is I like seeing things which don't fit into like the Hollywood 3-act structure. And most old stories don't, because they pre-exist Hollywood developing that that 3-act structure and kind of like refining it down to like every little point of the script. They'll have a name for it and a label for it. And some people will even say it has to occur, on this part of this page. The hero must have their, dark moment of the soul. So one of the things that appeals to me about fairy tales and myth is just weird stuff will happen, right? And then the story will just continue, and that'll just have been a thing that happened. I think because these come from a place of just raw creativity where they're just coming up with the ideas. So they'll just what's one? Oh yeah, like the one about a tea kettle that turns into a badger, right? That was clearly just like a crazy idea someone came up with, and then okay, now what am I going to do about this tea kettle that becomes into a badger? Oh, well, they toured the country, of course. And then I like that aspect of it. I like the aspect of unpredictability in a lot of fairy tales, especially.
Do you feel that fairy tales specifically have had an impact, good or bad, on more established Western fiction?
More like Disney adaptations of fairy tales, or do you mean fiction in general?
Fiction in general.
Okay, huh. Well, that's a tough cookie. They seem to evolve kind of like parallel to everything else, because you can find like the great old epics going back thousands of years, and you can find the sweet simple little fables going all the way back to Aesop, right? Like Aesop and Homer. They're from a similar ancient. They're both from ancient Greece. So I kind of see them as like going along concurrently, or literally, like fairy tales are for children, right? You don't read Homer to an 8-year-old; you read fairy tales to an 8-year-old, and then children immediately start telling stories. So I've worked as an art tutor, and one of the most important moments for me personally in my life was having the opportunity to like teach kids about art, and then discovering that all of these kids are just full of creative ideas, and they're completely able to think outside of the box. So I think that you asked me, do I think that fairy tales have affected literature for good or ill? I kind of look at it as fairy tales are like a little kid's first story, right? And so that can be the prompt for them to, I don't know, grow up and be Dostoevsky. And I think really the only difference is, as you become more mature, can you capture what makes the fairy tale good without droning on and on and on and on for 800 pages and not saying anything. So I think it's just a matter of like growing up. Like we grow up, we become more sophisticated, we become more deep in our thinking. But are we still in touch with like some of like the really primal, beautiful stuff that we were in touch with when we were reading stories as children?
No, I think that's actually really good. It actually brings up I've talked about this on stream before, but it's very germane here. One of my favorite, I'm a huge Aquaman fan, right? And my love of Aquaman extends to my childhood, but also back into the earlier stories. And back in the 50s and 60s, Aquaman was primarily being written for an 8-year-old girl audience.
Really?
Yeah, with the intention of being able to be enjoyed by an 8-year-old boy audience, right?
Why the girl angle? I've never heard that before.
It was just because girls were reading it, is what they found out.
Mermaids, right?
Yeah, well, mermaids and underwater castles and seahorses and all that kind of stuff. And because it was popular with girls, and that was why the Mera stories got so much weight, because everybody loved Mera and everybody loved Aquaman and Mera together, and it was one of those things where they dealt with these ideas of marriage and courtship and mutual ownership and duty, but it was written with a narrative language of a young child. So even though they had these very heavy themes, they were written with a very simple narrative language, full of melodrama and over exaggeration and 12-page resolution and all that kind of stuff. And it was and it's just fascinating how the writers and artists had the sophistication to make a simple story that had such had so many hidden truths in the way the story was told. I just thought that was very, very intriguing as I had going from reading Peter David's savage Aquaman stories of the 90s, then back to reading the stuff from the 60s, late 50s and the 60s, and about how much that moved on was just fascinating to me. And it's one of those things that why, one of the things I thought was a great victory of the recent Aquaman movie was that it was a great action story that still hit on all the things that women love about stories. Not that men can't love them, but family and duty and true love and sacrifice or huge themes in the Aquaman movie that were very true to the character historically. And I just thought it was a great thing on that. And so you're talking about fairy tales being the stepping stones to literature. And I think that's a really, really interesting perspective because we see that reflected in comics in the 20th century. And that's one of the things that, with the exception of probably My Little Pony and a couple of the books that Alterna puts out, are lost in modern comics.
Okay, yeah. So you mean like we're not speaking to like the young girls who like stories?
We're not speaking to young girls or young boys, either one.
Yeah, right. So maybe tying into that, like I've been reading a lot of shoujo manga, right? Mm-hmm. So I call them like sparkly bubble romances. There's always going to be like, like the flowers will appear out of nowhere and she'll be like totally bashful in the presence of like the tall, handsome boy, right? Mm-hmm. And so what's interesting about them to me is all of them are kind of like a window into like a female artist's mind, right? So that's just interesting to me as a guy. It's like, oh wow, do girls really think about this stuff this much? But I think for the best of them, it's sort of like they transcend the genre and they just they start telling. They start speaking in a language similar to how Jane Austen spoke. Like Jane Austen was such a perceptive woman that she could capture the feelings of men. Where I can read, her male characters and say, "Wow, that's how I feel about my relationships sometimes," right? And so I think, okay, this ties in with I'm all over the place, but this ties in with what you were saying about Aquaman. Is there was this development of Aquaman from like a very simple, character who could appeal to children to, the mature kind of like violent character of the 90s. I think that most beautiful art forms, and this is true of painting too, when you step back from them and you look at them with a big picture perspective, it's like you can see the evolution of ideas from decade to decade from generation to generation, which it's one of the most beautiful things about art history is seeing, wow, these people figured out how to sculpt again, like the ancient Greeks did. They lost that knowledge. They figured out how to do it again. And then they improved on that knowledge. And when you zoom out and look at it from generation to generation, you can see it. And then you zoom out and you look at comics from generation to generation, you can see this sort of evolution of how to communicate these ideas. And like it always starts out for children and then it becomes like for teenagers. And I think we're now in kind of a late phase where the Western comics market is a grown audience. And I think a lot of the energy for the Japanese market is still youthful. They're still appealing to children in that market.
I think there's a lot. I think there is hope for the American market to revert in some ways. But I think that part of that is that we have to understand that it's I don't know. I guess one of the problems we have is accessibility in the Western comics market. They're so inaccessible. They're not like when I was a kid where I was telling the story in the first hour. I walked into my local grocery store and I saw Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge on the shelf, yeah. Right? And that's what got me into comics was actually wanting my DuckTales fix.
Yeah.
And but that was one of those things where I my first year of reading comics changed my life. It redirected my entire life. And we seem to be missing that. And I think part of that's accessibility because of the current distribution system, part of its price point. And, thank God for Alterna there. But it's just one of those things where it seems like we're in the way that, let me see if I can explain this. In a way that Disney kind of has neutered the fairy tale for the West. For the developed West anyway, right? Mm-hmm. We don't read fairy tales anymore. We just put on a DVD, right?
Yeah.
in a similar way, I think we're doing the same thing to like authentic children's literature, where instead of being something that builds more complex thoughts, it becomes either the goal for middle-aged somethings to hang on to. I think Harry Potter is a perfect example of that, because now the generation that grew up on Harry Potter are beginning their middle age, and and they're insufferable.
I think that's a consequence of just illiteracy in general. Like, because Harry Potter was presented as like the book to get kids hooked on reading, and I read Harry Potter and I got hooked on. Well, I read stuff before I read Harry Potter, but I was definitely one of those kids who like read all the Harry Potter books when they came out, and then started reading a bunch of other stuff. And I really think that's the difference. I think if you read if you've read more books than just Harry Potter, you can see how Harry Potter is not an Antifa book. If the only thing you read is Harry Potter, then you just project. You use that to project your biases onto everything else. Like Voldemort is anti-school choice. That's my favorite bit, right? They called Betsy DeVos a Voldemort character because Betsy DeVos was pro-school choice. When Voldemort came to power, the very first thing he did was he banned the ability of wizards to homeschool their children, because Voldemort wanted to control their education.
Yes. Actually, that's one of the, side note there, that the picking up on some of the subtext that I don't think Rowling intended in the book, because if you really took the ideas presented in Harry Potter to their logical extreme, you would not get a leftist world at all.
I don't think you can help it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Carl.
It's literally an open carry campus, for crying out loud. Like, these kids have dangerous magic sticks.
It's an open carry campus. It argues the merits of decentralized governance. It argues the importance of the distrust of people in large groups, and the trust of and the valor of individuals. It's very much a Western philosophical book. Plays on all of those concepts, and Rowling herself is a Labor Party lackey. It's just hilarious to me.
I think sometimes, well, for storytellers especially, storytellers might not even be able to wrap their heads around the implications of their own narrative. Now, I want to be careful, because I hate the term "death of the author." I think it's a postmodern idea. I think the grain of truth in the idea is that it's possible for a storyteller not to understand what the creative side of their brain create, like the rational side of their brain might not be able to wrap itself around what just the incentives came up.
I think that there's actually an emotional aspect to that, because people get in love with the idea of postmodernism, but that's not how people live their lives. People live their lives like moderns or pre-moderns that are successful at all. That aren't, living on their buddy's couch, getting GoFundMe for sandwiches. Those people live pre-modern philosophic lives, but they preach postmodernism.
Right.
And I think part of that is an emotional aspect. And the other side of it is, I think there is real truth. I mean, the reason the Greeks came up with the concept of the muse was to try to explain where creativity comes from, because I will speak for myself. There are times where I am possessed of ideas that are more complex than I would think capable of. And I think that is an experience that is not unique to me. And I can definitely understand where the concept of the muse would come from in that kind of context. And so I think some people don't question. And I honestly think that part of that is actually from the working of the unconscious mind, where our brains tick along when we're not paying attention to them, and it can present us with solutions on the other side of that without us really noticing it.
Yeah.
But outside of that, I think that for people that are creative and that work in that space, I don't think they necessarily take the time to realize that the rational subtext of Western culture has shaped, which is individualistic and honorific, and all that, has shaped an idea that is contrary to what they believe about the world.
Right, which is the problem with like you were talking earlier about how like the American context is different than the European context. I kind of look at like the regressive left as like the European left, like eroding at kind of like the classical left and making what used to be, they're making the Liberal Party liberal in name only. Like there's nothing liberal about the Liberal Party anymore. Yeah, thanks to kind of like that, international influence of Europe creeping its way over here. I don't know where I was going with that, actually. Oh, okay. Where I was going with that is like most of my experience with Comicsgate was I wouldn't even use the hashtag that much. I would just because I was on like an SJW art school, I would like see a drawing and someone would say, you know, I am so progressive, you know, I respect women in my art. And then I would look at it and I'd say, well, couldn't this part of your drawing be argued to be catering to the male gaze, right? Because I couldn't help myself. I knew what the, you know, like the feminist lenses were. I could like turn on the feminist lenses and see problematic stuff anywhere. So I just kind of like ask him a few questions like, well, is this problematic? Isn't this problematic? Which is what happened with Gail Simone is because I was on a campus, I'd have to read, you know, article after article after article on transphobia in culture. So I took one look at Plastic Man, and I instantly saw it. This is problematic. This is transphobic humor. Don't you care, Gail? And she ignored me, of course, because I was a right-wing troll with a cartoon dog avatar. And then a few days go by, and she's apologizing profusely for transphobic humor in Plastic Man because she had her own philosophy means. If you, I sincerely believe that if you were to take the kind of progressive radical feminist lens to its logical conclusion, storytelling would become impossible. Nothing that we like is free from being accused of being problematic. And so many of these people, they love the traditional side of these stories. People love it when Link bursts in and saves Princess Zelda. They don't want Princess Zelda to be like a, you know, what is it, a wilting flower who does nothing. They like that Zelda's an active character, but they like when Link heroically bursts in and saves her from Ganondorf. And that's something that you can't have if you have a worldview that says these kinds of stories are immoral. These kinds of stories create you know, oppressive gender hierarchies. So my hope is that the more successful like the academic left is at introducing their ideas to the world, my only hope for the fate of Western civilization is that most people kind of like put two and two together and say, wait a second, this means I can't have any fun at all. This means I can't enjoy any of the things I enjoy. This means that the story I'm telling, you know, when I doodle pictures in the side of my notebook, that means this is all problematic too.
And I think we're actually, I honestly believe that we're on the threshold of that. Especially when you look at the reaction that the internet at least is having to the Battle Angel, right? It's become wildly successful. It's breaking records across the world. It's a great picture, and it is so pro-feminine.
Yeah.
I want to point out one thing. I was talking. I don't know when he put it out, but Professor Geek put out a video on the heroine archetype that is amazingly well done. And one of his points is that the heroine archetype is specific in that it is a female who performs feats typically reserved for males, but performs them in such a way that it accentuates her femininity. Mm-hmm. Right? She is more of a woman and is visibly as more of a woman, and her female traits are more displayed, not just visually, mind you, but are more displayed because of her heroism than they would be if she were merely a victim. And Zelda is an amazing example of that. And the active places in those games, Wonder Woman, and in many depictions is that, and Alita 100%. Like one of the things that got my heart so much about that movie is that Christopher Waltz, anyway, he plays the father character, right? Who finds this little girl and gives her agency by giving her a body, right? And just dotes upon her in a way where he wants to protect this gal that he found, right? And it's a totally paternal thing, and the dynamism between the actors is just wonderful. You can really just sense that about it. It's great, and it's but her being virtually indestructible, right? Because of the strength of her spirit is really what makes her so, because her body is destructible. But it speaks so much to her femininity, despite the fact that her body is a machine. You know, I am the father of boys. I do not have a daughter, but I still feel that paternal aspect toward those characters, and they did a wonderful job of relating to that. And it's one of those things where people are dogging on this movie, saying it's inappropriate for this reason or that reason or this reason, but it's only the people that get paid to complain, right? The people that are out there going to watch the movie, they're just like, my heart, Alita has my heart now, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that we're in a position where there is in our mass media, there are these depictions of positive women who carry that heroic archetype that I think shapes it in a way where if they keep pushing against it, saying, "Oh, it's problematic because it's racist, it's problematic because it's sexist," pretty soon, I think, people are going to have to either ignore it or address that. And I think it's the addressing so far has been ineffective.
Related to that, I've been thinking about like the problem of the strong female archetype for like probably like 6 years, right? Ever since it became like a meta discussion of like strong female protagonists, I've been thinking about it. And like just for me when I'm writing, like there's an element of me, there's like what are my open wounds, what are my foibles, what are my strengths and weaknesses, right? And that can be fodder. But then I also realize, hey, I have family, I have friends, I can draw from their experiences. I have an understanding of these people in my families, how their personalities bounce off each other. So when you were talking about like the feminine the heroine archetype, being a character who does traditionally male heroic feats of amazingness, right? But it accentuates her femininity. What I think about is I think that the secret ingredient is life. It doesn't matter if she's a robot girl, right, with a android body that her adopted father gives her. What gives her that? I read the first volume of the manga, and what kind of gives her that spark of life is that she's kind of a bit of a pouty but really well-meaning teenager. She has this really sweet side to her, but she also has a little bit of that kind of like defiant spirit to her, and it comes across in how she's drawn, which is something if you were raised with sisters who would go through like those crazy teenage years. You have this life experience that you can draw from and put in your art.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an aspect. I think one of the strengths as far as writing goes too reminds me of an interview from, oh man, it's probably almost been 20 years ago, with Chuck Dixon. I think it was in Wizard magazine, and somebody asked him, how do you write such compelling girls? Because he was the first writer on the Birds of Prey series. It was his idea, right? And they said, how do you write such compelling girls? And he said, well, I had only sisters, and that's it. And so he grew up surrounded by his mom and his 4 sisters. So he was around girls talking and being girls all the time, and he was able to take that and make arguably the greatest female-led comic at least in the last 30 years, I would say.
Yeah.
And arguably, I mean, somebody's going to come out of the work and say, "Hey, you didn't never read." No, I probably didn't, but yeah. But it's up there, and I think that's something that. But at the same time, that baffles me too, because I just finished reading all of, and I gotta leave here in just a little while. But I just finished reading the entire 15-issue run of Gail Simone's Secret Six, the New 52 series, and it is terrible, absolutely terrible. I don't think there is a single issue without some sort of dick or vag joke.
Yeah.
It's grotesque. Yeah. It is really bad. And it was the same with her Plastic Man too. She just couldn't leave the penis humor behind. It was bizarre.
You guys,
that sounds like Gail has something on her mind.
Yeah. The change might be affecting her in bad ways. Who knows?
I know she had a sexist gag about Plastic Man spanking some lady on one of her covers for her series. So
yeah,
maybe he's got some internalized misogyny going there.
Yeah. Or the pink. Who knows?
That may be an example of the author's poorly disguised fetish trope.
Yeah, I would not be surprised. Anyway, that's being judgy. I don't mean to be, other than about the art, which was the writing, which was just miserable. The women aren't written consistently. They're all written like some Stag Films version of women, and not necessarily in like all overtly sexual ways either. And the saddest example of the characterization of a woman in that series was the way she did characterize Sue Dibney, who is a living girl in a refrigerator, right? Like she's placed in peril, so that you give some weight to the plight of Ralph Dibney, but in that, like, she has no agency and no character of her own. She's got a bit of a sassy attitude in one page of one issue, and in the rest of it, she's just a MacGuffin. And it was one of those to see her never even be able to be an active participant in the story. It's just disrespectful to the character and to the concept of women in fiction. I can't understand how the gal who made her name off of an essay decrying the practice of brutalizing women would strip the agency and character from one of the most puissant married females in comic literature ever. And I think it's
to live up to the standards that Gail Simone would espouse, right? So I don't mind occasionally having a character, right? Not who may even just be like a plot point as part of some other character's story, right? Like there's a part of me that says, oh, well, if you were a more sophisticated writer, like every single character would have, this depth and range of emotion, but especially in like, popular fiction and short fiction, sometimes, some character is going to get short shrift. So another character can kind of get the screen time to establish who they are. So I do I click with what you say is I prefer if the character in danger has, some agency, some emotion to them, like Princess Peach, especially like in the RPG games where they actually care about telling a story. Like they would give her things to do. They would give her a character arc. Right. And so then you become more invested in rescuing her because you see that she's not just a, paper doll cutout. You see that she's you read her as a person with these great positive heroic traits to her. So I don't like bag on people who occasionally have like a MacGuffin character. But right. I do agree with you that if you can give that character agency, right, that's what makes them more interesting than like, oh no, he kidnapped the Hope Diamond. We got to get the Hope Diamond back. If it's not going to be Hope Diamond, if it's going to be Susie, then tell me who Susie is, so I care about who Susie is.
And that's one of the big issues with Sue Dibney as a character. I don't know if you're I'm a pretty big Elongated Man fan, right?
I'm not. And so
Ralph and Sue Dibney were DC's answer to both Plastic Man and Nick and Nora Charles. Okay, so Sue has been. She was a part of the Justice League International. She's been an active character in most Elongated Man stories. He's the love. They're the love of each other's life. Before they were part of the Justice League, they would travel around America, just finding adventures and mysteries along the way. And she was a very, very active part of the Elongated Man story prior to her murder in a ridiculous fashion in Identity Crisis, which is a whole different bag of worms I'm not going to get into at the moment. But they brought her back just to be a plot point.
Yeah.
And that was the thing about it. The story is she got, this puissant, active, intelligent, sophisticated woman was just written off as a plot point by a writer who made her living touting the glories of feminist literature.
Yeah. I'm
a little bitter about it.
Right. if you think that everyone who came before you was an awful, terrible, sexist, straight white male, then why would you bother investing the time in figuring that out about the character, right?
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay, guys, I got to pull the plug. I'm running late as it is. So I want to thank you guys so much for coming on. While we're still on, Carl, do you want to go ahead and share your information?
Oh, sure. I am a amateur cartoonist making a webcomic called Holgrave. You can find it on Tapas, and you can find me on Twitter. My handle is at Carl's Amateur Hour. HR, not hour is not spelled out. Or I believe I changed my regular screen name to Carltoons, but my @ would be Carl's Amateur Hour. I also have a YouTube channel of the same name, so check that out if you guys want to.
I cannot wait to read Holgrave. I am so excited to read it.
It's really good.
It's
And
not
Marmaduke.
it's whole grave.
Holgrave.
It's the whole darn thing.
The whole dog. I have to steal that now. It's the whole dog.
Oh, but, well, I got a couple other ones lined up. Like you got to have an episode in Hell called Hellgrave.
Well, they're actually the in-universe equivalent to Hell does actually play a part in the story, ironically enough.
70s version in a disco called Hull Groove.
Oh,
That's ridiculous.
somebody
Fan. Somebody on YouTube. Thanks so much for coming by.
Hey, thanks for having me on. It's been a blast.
Well, guys, I'm going to bow out, and I'm just going to close my screen and let what happens happens. If you guys want to stay on and chat and that works, that's awesome. I'll go out in the world. Once my computer goes to sleep, the stream will die for the broadcast. So, guys, get out there, read some comics, and love the ones that are close to you.
Because someone's going to take them away.
Are we still live?
I think we're still live.
The live button is still present, I think.
It'll go for a little bit.
Hey, everyone on Matt's channel. Let's talk about how stinky Matt is now that he's gone.
Oh, yeah, everyone. I remember one time he beat me up and stole my lunch money, and told me I'd never amount to anything. And my mom just told me that it was part of life, that you need to get used to it. And I became a mean, tough guy because of it. So I guess in a way, I have to thank Matt for everything. Take me into the man I am today.
Hashtag Matt2.
Matt 2. This time it's another Matt.
It is always fun trying to say, like, hey, Matt, and then realizing I'm on this channel.
Yeah.
Dr. Jones. What?
I need and Jerkface, as much of a great name as it is, it just doesn't roll off the tongue very easily.
The whole time we've been streaming, I've been thinking about how Carl's profile picture is at a similar angle to like Matt's profile picture, so it's sort of like we're getting a X-ray of Carl's character.
Oh, you mean Matt's character? What
Yeah,
was
the
his
skull
first
thing.
name?
Yeah.
What was his first name? Something
Miles.
the Golem.
Yeah, it's I totally see what you mean. It does kind of look like it's like, oh, it goes from Carl. And this is the inside of Carl's head. He's got some fricked up teeth.
Not in real life though. I had braces.
He's very sensitive about his dental hygiene. I would not pick on him unless
Yeah, I guess the Golem does kind of look like a skull now that you mention it.
I get to be edgy Reggie.
Carl, did you get to talk about your artistic inspirations at the start of the stream before I hopped on?
Yeah, I think so.
Nice. I've always noticed it. Like you were one of the first people to do fan art for my channel, and I've always noticed you have this kind of really interesting mashup. It really is your own thing. Like I can tell you borrowed from like several sources of inspiration and made it your own thing. So I'm really excited to see Hullgrave because of that.
Yeah, the first chapter, I'm not immensely proud of the art in it, but it's all right, I guess. What I've got for the second chapter so far, I actually genuinely like.
I think we're still live.
We are. I don't know how.
Magic, my friends.
We just. So then, who has the ability to terminate going live? Does it just stop, or is there like this broadcasting an empty void when we leave?
Oh yeah, man. Poor other Matt. He'll have to come in here and like do the. Can you do the trim feature on a live stream?
Can I do the what now?
Can you trim a live stream after it becomes a normal video?
I don't know. I don't upload these. It's other Matt.
Yeah, I know you don't upload them, Matt.
You provide the
Your
voice.
channel wasn't even approved, and you had to do the
Yeah, I had to steal
online.
Carl's for the house party. It turned into I accidentally burned down my house. It turned from house party to help. I accidentally burned my house trying to make pizza rolls, and I'm staying at Carl's house for a little bit.
That's a creative name to name mystery.
It didn't fit all the way in there.
Yeah, I know. I titled it Mattriarchy House Party.
House Party Edition
or something like that.
Yeah. Featuring Dante from the Devil May Cry series.
Did you guys see the boomer who like commented on Devil May Cry 5? This is why we elected the worst man ever to be president of the United States.
I knew it.
I was dumbfounded by that because I was like, how did you manage to get that out of Devil May Cry?
Kids these days and their devil games.
And their devil games that gives us Trump.
Sounds to me like somebody pulled his devil trigger.
Someone's devil triggered, yeah. Virgil is like the only swordsman I've ever seen that almost always that sword is just in the sheath.
Huh.
I mean, yeah, you do see the blade itself at several points, but you know, there's so many points, especially in Marvel vs. Capcom, where he only unsheaths it for a second and already like there's 5 different slashes across the screen.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cool styles like that in these games.
Do you guys know Zatoichi?
Zatoichi, the half or like the blind samurai.
Yeah.
I've heard the story, and I know that the joke in Team Fortress is the half Zatoichi, which is for the Devil Man and the soldier who are both half blind for different reasons.
Yeah. You reminded me of that because of like the flashing sword thing. Like the choreography of those movies is like ridiculously ahead of the time. Like I think they were anticipating like modern action sequences. They were so over the top. And Kitaro is like one of the few like Japanese like everyone knows, you know, Toshiro Mifune because he's just so iconic. He's so famous. He's in everything, right? And he is a good character actor. But the actor who plays Zatoichi just completely embodies the character. Like you